This is a word that people seem to talk about all the time, but I don't think people really know what it means.
It's a combination, basically, of a lot of factors.
I think I have no answer to that.
I don't know. There isn't any answer.
The more I researched it, the more I realized that nobody truly knew what it meant.
I wanted to feel cinematic.
Online these days about people shooting cinematic videos.
So what does cinematic actually mean?
I realised that what we've done is devalue the word cinematic.
What makes a video cinematic?
What does cinematic even mean?
We have this intuitive programming that our modern culture instilled in our heads, specifically Hollywood instilled in our heads. The umbrella term for cinematic describes everything under the Hollywood sun. And so cinematic means that it looks like a Hollywood movie. But when we describe what the Hollywood look is, we say it is cinematic. You see the issue here? The Hollywood look is cinematic, but cinematic is the Hollywood look. It's a synonym definition. It doesn't answer the question. And so we know when it is cinematic, but yet we don't know why. We can't define what it is that determines if something is cinematic. In 1891, a famous inventor named Thomas Edison created an invention called the kinetoscope. Edison had the goal of creating what they called motion picture film, and he did it by showing multiple images in a quick succession, creating the illusion of movement. Fast forward a bit in 1895, and a photographer by the name of Antoine Lumière was invited to a showing of Edison's kinetoscope in Paris. Mr. Lumière was so blown away by this invention that he went back to his two sons, Louis and Auguste, to explain to them how amazing this kinetoscope thing was. And so, both brothers got inspired to create an invention of their own, which later on became le cinématographe. Thus, cinema was born. Now, it's unclear when the word cinematic was created, but we know it was after 1895. But we'll get to that. So the Lumière brothers got the word cinematographe by combining two Greek words, kinema and graphen. Kinema means movement and graphen means to write. And so together they make the writing of movement. Rather poetic if you ask me. And so if we look at today's modern term, it actually makes a lot of sense. If we're watching cinema, then it's just the movement. And it works because it already has been written by the cinematographer, the one who writes. Okay, so if we go back to our word cinematic, it turns out that it comes from a combination of two words, cinema and kinematic. Cinema, with now its modern twist meaning motion picture, and kinematic, which means the study of movement. And so, in its most original form, cinematic means the study of motion picture. And so, in a way, it kind of just means you've studied well and understand the craft of cinema. So that's cool and all, but it still doesn't really answer the question. But to be fair, I think the question just wasn't clear enough, so let me rephrase my question. What is it that defines the cinematic look? Today, when we go to the movie theater, we know that whatever we're going to watch, it's going to have that cinematic look. With high-end budgets and million-dollar film production companies, the least we can expect is a good-looking film. And so, when an average consumer creates a look similar to those of the blockbuster film production companies, then we coin it cinematic. The cinematic look would kind of just mean it looks good, or up to high standard. But that would also mean that a cinematic look is subjective. But it's not. We can tell by intuition when something is cinematic and when something is not. And so, even though today we use it as a way to say that a movie looks good, it's much more specific than that. Because the cinematic look is a very specific style. Cinematic is associated with good, but it does not equal good. Good phone footage is not cinematic, but a phone could make cinematic images. And so this is why defining the cinematic look is so hard, because we're not just trying to define a compliment, but a very specific style that is associated to a compliment. So after exploring YouTube for a little while, this is kind of the definition that I was able to create with what YouTubers would say. Cinematography techniques such as wide aspect ratios, the 180-degree shutter rule, 24p, bokeh, and slow motion that makes motion picture look more similar to high-budget cinema. So this is what they call an extensional definition. This type of definition uses multiple examples of differentiators that belong to the concept to create clarity in the reader's mind. So this definition tells us how to achieve the cinematic look. The internet has blessed us with an unlimited supply of knowledge on this subject. Although not all of it is true, there are numerous amounts of filmmaking techniques that help us create our so-called cinematic look. Many of these techniques are used by professionals to make images cinematic. But although they help make images more cinematic, they don't define them as cinematic. You don't absolutely need to do all of these at the same time to get the so-called cinematic look. Grand Budapest Hotel is a movie that uses multiple aspect ratios. Saving Private Ryan used a shutter angle of 45 degrees. Most shots in movies aren't in slow motion. Many wide shots or establishing shots don't have bokeh. The issue with this definition is that it doesn't define what makes the cinematic look, but how to achieve the cinematic look. The idea behind cinematic is that it's not just a look, but a type of language. Just instead of using words as a way of communication, it uses visual storytelling. Some call it a code, others would just say that they understand their craft, but it all kind of mimics the same idea. In this case, a cinematic image wouldn't just be passively recording actors going about their business, but instead it would communicate a concept, emotion, and mood through framing, lens choice, and movement, which would then reinforce, comment, or even contradict what is happening on screen. This is the true art of cinema and the job that a cinematographer has when crafting an image. So the definition of cinematic would then be all the techniques and methods of visual storytelling that we use to add layers of meaning to the content. This would probably be the best definition that I could find to define cinematic, but it still isn't really clear to me what defines the look, as the look in itself is incredibly vague. It can kind of go in any direction as long as it fits the story that is being told. In this case, this definition tells what makes something cinematic, but doesn't visually clarify how cinematic looks. If I try to define the color red, I can tell it fits in between orange and violet, or that in the light spectrum it has a wavelength of 650 nanometers. But that wouldn't help you visualize what red really looks like. The best way to truly describe red would be if I showed it to you. There's a reason why nobody has been able to truly describe the cinematic look. The issue with defining the cinematic look is that cinematic in itself is a style, and in a way it's like an art movement. Try defining the art movement of surrealism. If you read a text that explains an art movement, you still don't truly understand what it looks like. It's only when you see it for the first time that you understand what surrealism is. That's when you understand that language is a medium that is unable to perfectly describe the cinematic look. And it makes sense because language was never designed to describe imagery. I think the best way to describe the cinematic look would be if we used imagery. And like great directors would say, show, don't tell.